There is a place on Earth where the air itself becomes a weapon. Not a metaphor, not an exaggeration for effect. A literal, measurable, physiological weapon that the human body cannot defend against without help because the human body was not designed for this. No body was. The Sahara Desert at its peak summer temperatures, in its deep interior in the hours between 10 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon, is a thermal environment so extreme that it operates outside the boundaries of what most people have ever experienced or can genuinely imagine from a description. 50 degrees Celsius in the shade, except there is no shade. There is no shade for hundreds of kilometers in any direction. The ground surface temperature is not 50 degrees, it is 70. It is sometimes 80. You could fry an egg on the sand, and that is not a figure of speech, that is a documented physical fact. The sand itself radiates heat upward with the intensity of a broiler, so that a person standing in the Sahara at midday in July is being cooked from above by the sun and from below by the earth simultaneously, with hot, dry air moving through the gap in between. And people survive here, not just survive, live here, have always lived here for thousands of years in communities whose knowledge of this environment is so refined and so specific and so hard-won that it constitutes one of the most extraordinary bodies of practical human wisdom on the planet. Knowledge that was never written down in most cases. Knowledge that was transmitted through watching and doing and being corrected and watching again, parent to child, elder to young person, generation to generation across a span of time that makes the entire history of modern science look like a footnote. Subscribe right now if you want to understand the world the way it actually works, not the sanitized version, not the version that leaves out the heat and the difficulty and the astonishing ingenuity, but the real thing, the deep thing. Let us go. The Sahara is the largest hot desert on Earth. That fact gets stated often enough that it has lost its capacity to surprise, so let me try to give it back its size. The Sahara covers approximately 9,400,000 square kilometers. That is roughly the size of the continental United States. It stretches from the Atlantic coast of Mauritania in the west to the Red Sea coast of Egypt and Sudan in the east, a distance of nearly 5,000 kilometers. From its northern edge along the Atlas Mountains and the Mediterranean coast to its southern edge where it fades into the Sahel, it spans another 2,000 kilometers. It encompasses parts of 10 countries. It contains mountain ranges whose peaks exceed 3,000 meters and salt flats that sit below sea level. It contains the largest continuous sand sea in the world. The Rub al Khali bleeds into it from the east, and it contains vast plateaus of bare rock called regs and hamadas that look nothing like the rolling sand dunes of cinema, but are in many ways more unforgiving because there is not even the false promise of something soft underfoot. And the Sahara is not one climate. This is the first thing that people who have never been there get wrong, and it is an important thing to get right because it changes everything about how we talk about survival here. The Sahara has a coastline zone along the north where moisture from the Mediterranean occasionally reaches. It has a high-altitude zone in places like the Ahagar Mountains of Algeria and the Taibesti of Chad where temperature ranges are extreme, cold at night, genuinely cold, below freezing in winter and ferociously hot during the day. It has zones of absolute hyperraridity where the annual rainfall is measured in single-digit millimeters, years passing without any precipitation at all. And it has zones along the wadis, the seasonal riverbeds, and around the scattered deep aquifers that feed the oases, where life concentrates with an intensity that is almost startling against the background of nothing. The Sahara's deadliest hours, that is what we are here to talk about. And to talk about them properly, we have to understand what happens to the human body when it is placed inside them. The human body is a thermal regulation machine. It has to be because the core temperature at which our organs function is remarkably narrow. Below 35 degrees Celsius and the processes start shutting down in one direction. Above 41 degrees and they start shutting down in the other direction. The body has a range of about 6 degrees roughly within which it can be alive and functioning. Everything outside that range is a medical emergency. And the Sahara in its peak hours is trying, with great insistence, to push the body's core temperature above that upper limit. The primary defense the body has against overheating is sweating, evaporative cooling. As sweat evaporates from the skin surface, it carries heat with it, pulling thermal energy out of the body and into the surrounding air. This is elegant and effective provided two conditions are met. First, that there is water to replace what is being sweated out. Second, that the surrounding air is dry enough to actually accept the evaporating moisture. In the Sahara, the second condition is almost always met. Desert air is extraordinarily dry, often single-digit relative humidity, and it accepts evaporation aggressively. This is why the Sahara, despite its extreme temperatures, is survivable in ways that a wet heat environment of similar temperature would not be. In a tropical jungle at 40 degrees Celsius, the air is so saturated with moisture that your sweat barely evaporates and you cook. In the Sahara at 50 degrees, the sweat evaporates instantly and you are cooled, provided you have water to keep sweating. But the rate at which you need to sweat to maintain thermal equilibrium in those conditions is staggering. A person doing light activity in 50-degree Sahara heat can lose more than a liter of water per hour through sweating. A person walking, doing anything beyond lying still in the most minimal way, can lose 2 liters per hour or more. In a full working day in the deep desert, a person can sweat out 8 to 12 liters of water. The human body contains roughly 42 liters of water in total. Do the math on how quickly this becomes catastrophic without replenishment. At a loss of 2% of body weight in water, cognitive performance begins to decline. At 5%, serious physical impairment. At 10%, kidney failure becomes a risk. At 15%, death is possible. At 20%, death is likely. The desert knows this. The people who live in the desert know that the desert knows this, and they have organized their entire existence around the management of this single fact. Water is not a resource in the Sahara. Water is the terms of survival, the non-negotiable condition on which everything else is predicated, the thing that determines where you can go and when, and for how long and what you can do when you get there. Every other piece of desert knowledge flows from this one central truth. The Tuareg? Let us begin with the Tuareg because in any conversation about surviving the Sahara's deadliest hours, any conversation that is trying to be honest and serious rather than performative, you have to begin with the people who have been doing it longest and best. The Tuareg are a Berber people, the indigenous inhabitants of much of the central and western Sahara, whose culture and way of life has been adapted to this environment for at least 2,000 years, and almost certainly much longer. They call themselves Kel Tamashek, the people of the Tamashek language, and they live across a territory that spans portions of modern Mali, Niger, Algeria, Libya, and Burkina Faso, in the heart of the hottest, driest, most difficult part of the Sahara. The Tuareg are traditionally nomadic or semi-nomadic pastoralists and traders, herding camels and goats and cattle across a landscape that requires constant movement to find enough grazing, and historically controlling the trans-Saharan trade routes that carried gold and salt and slaves and later cotton and other goods between sub-Saharan Africa and the Mediterranean world. The management of these routes, knowing where the water was and how to reach it, and how much a caravan could carry and how many days between wells a group of animals and people could survive, was a form of knowledge so valuable and so difficult to acquire that it constituted genuine economic power. The Tuareg did not just survive the Sahara. They monetized the Sahara's difficulty by being the people who understood it. The Tajamust, the great blue veil of the Tuareg man. You have seen images of it, the deep indigo cloth wound around the head and face leaving only the eyes visible. Sometimes even the eyes covered with a thin layer of the fabric, and if you have seen those images without understanding what you were looking at, you might have thought it was a cultural or religious statement, and it is that too, but before it is that it is a survival technology. The Tajamust wound correctly does several things simultaneously. It protects the face and neck from direct solar radiation. The sun in the open Sahara is not just hot. It is actively burning exposed skin at a rate that most pale-skinned visitors from temperate climates find genuinely shocking, but that people of any skin tone cannot ignore over an extended period. It protects the respiratory passages from the extreme dryness of the desert air, because breathing very dry hot air without any filtration desiccates the mucous membranes of the mouth, throat, and lungs in ways that become acutely painful and eventually medically dangerous. The moisture from a person's own breath, trapped slightly by the fabric, creates a local microclimate around the face that moderates the exchange. The indigo dye of the traditional Tajamust, the deep blue that has historically come from the indigo plant and that in the old textile traditions was so heavily applied that it rubbed off onto the skin of the wearer, giving rise to the Tuareg's famous description as the blue men of the desert. This dye has properties that go beyond color. Indigo-dyed fabric in the very specific traditional technique used in the Saharan textile tradition has a texture and a density that makes it an effective barrier against both heat radiation and wind-driven sand in a way that a lighter, less densely woven fabric does not. This was not discovered by modern materials scientists. This was discovered by people wearing cloth in the desert and paying extremely close attention to what kept them alive. The camel is not a vehicle in Tuareg culture. It is not a resource in the way that an oil well is a resource or a crop is a resource. The camel is a partner, an ecological partner, a metabolic partner, an animal that has been co-evolving with human desert life in North Africa for long enough that its capabilities and the requirements of nomadic desert travel have shaped each other in a kind of mutual adaptation. The dromedary camel, the single-humped species of the Sahara, can go without water for 10 to 15 days in cooler weather and less than that, but still significantly in hot conditions. It can lose up to 25% of its body weight in water, a loss that would be fatal for almost any other large mammal, and then rehydrate catastrophically fast when water is available, drinking up to 100 liters in a single session at a watering point, and tolerating this rapid fluid intake without the physiological crisis that would kill a human being or a horse attempting the same. It can eat vegetation that is so dry and thorny and nutritionally marginal that most animals would ignore it entirely. Its feet are designed for sand in a way that no alternative draft animal is. Its body temperature, rather than being kept rigidly constant as the human body tries to do, fluctuates with the ambient temperature through the day, storing heat during the hot hours and releasing it at night, a strategy that reduces the need for cooling and therefore reduces the need for water. The camel is a desert solution that evolution produced over millions of years and that Tuareg society recognized and adopted and built its entire economy around. To understand a Tuareg elder's relationship with their camels is to understand something fundamental about how knowledge works in an environment where knowledge is survival. The ability to read a camel's physical condition, to know from the state of the hump which deflates as the fat reserve is metabolized, and from the behavior and from subtle signs in the eyes and the gait, exactly how depleted an animal is and how far it can be pushed before permanent damage or death becomes a risk. This is a diagnostic skill as sophisticated as anything a veterinarian learns in formal training, and it was acquired entirely through observation and practice over a lifetime that began in childhood. Children in traditional Tuareg communities were not taught this as a lesson. They learned it by being with the camels, by watching what the adults noticed, by being allowed to make small mistakes under supervision and experiencing the consequences. By accumulating, observation by observation, the vocabulary of camel behavior and physiology that would eventually constitute a complete and reliable diagnostic system. Now let me talk about the hours, the specific, particular, deadly hours that give this story its stakes. In the Sahara in high summer, roughly June through August at the latitude of the central desert, the sun rises before 6 in the morning. In the 2 hours after sunrise, the temperature climbs with a speed that is startling if you have not experienced it. You can feel it happening, not gradually, abruptly. The early morning in the desert, the hour just before and after sunrise, can be almost pleasant. In the high Sahara, in places like the Ahagar or the Air Mountains of Niger, early mornings in summer are sometimes genuinely cool, not cold as they would be in winter, but cool enough that you would not sweat at rest. The sky in those first minutes after dawn is the color of a bruise healing, deep indigo shading to purple to orange, and the silence is total and the air is absolutely clear in a way that feels almost aggressive in its clarity, the stars going out one by one as the light builds. And then the sun gets above the horizon and the temperature starts to climb, and it does not stop for 8 hours. By 10 in the morning, in the open desert in July, the air temperature in the shade, the theoretical shade that does not exist, is already above 40 degrees. By noon it is 45 or higher. Between 1 and 3 in the afternoon, in the hottest parts of the hottest months, air temperatures of 50 degrees Celsius or above are not unusual in the low-lying parts of the Sahara, the basins and the plains where there is no altitude to moderate the heat and no moisture anywhere in the landscape to absorb it, and the ground temperature, which is what you're standing on, which is what radiates heat up through the air column around you, is 20 to 30 degrees hotter than that. These are not temperatures that human bodies can function in without specific behavioral and physical adaptations. Full stop. The metabolic cost of maintaining core temperature in those conditions, even at complete rest, is enormous. The heart is working harder, the blood is being redirected to the periphery for cooling. The sweating rate is at maximum. The body is, quite literally, fighting for its life against the physics of its environment. And it can only do this for so long before the water runs out or the cooling system is overwhelmed. The Tuareg solution to the deadliest hours is so simple that it sounds obvious until you think about it from the perspective of a culture that does not live in a desert. The solution is, do not be in them. Do not be outside in the open Sahara between roughly 10 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon. This is not laziness. This is not cultural preference. This is the precise temporal equivalent of not walking off a cliff. The deadliest hours are a physical phenomenon, and the correct response to a physical phenomenon of that kind is to remove yourself from it. The Tuareg traditionally arranged the entire structure of their day around this reality. Pre-dawn activity, travel, herding, water collection, any physically demanding work that needed to be done was done in the hours before the heat climbed to its peak. By mid-morning, the pace shifted. By midday, the focus was on minimizing exposure, minimizing activity, staying in whatever shade existed. The mobile tent of the Tuareg, made from camel or goat leather over a light wooden frame, oriented correctly relative to the prevailing wind and the sun angle, provides genuine shade and the slightly cooler air that shade makes possible. It is not comfortable in the way that air conditioning is comfortable. It is survivable in the way that shade in a desert is survivable. That is the correct frame of reference. The afternoon move begins again when the sun starts to descend and the temperature begins to drop. The last 2 to 3 hours of daylight are active hours again, and then comes the Sahara night. The Sahara night is one of the great underappreciated phenomena of the natural world, and it is intimately connected to the survival system of the desert. Because the same property of the desert air that makes the days so deadly, its extreme dryness, also makes the nights extraordinary. Dry air holds very little heat when the sun sets in the Sahara. The ground that has been absorbing solar energy all day begins to radiate that energy upward into a sky that is absolutely cloudless and absolutely transparent, and the temperature drops with a speed that is just as startling as the morning climb, but in the other direction. By midnight in the high desert, a place that was 50 degrees at 2 in the afternoon can be 15 degrees or even lower. By 4 in the morning, with the ground temperature dropping through radiation even faster than the air temperature, the sand can be cool enough that lying on it is comfortable rather than catastrophic. The Sahara night resets the system. It gives the body back the thermal safety it spent the day losing. It allows the landscape to prepare for the next day's assault. And it is, for the people who live in the Sahara, not a period of mere sleep but a time of activity, of community, of storytelling and music and the management of animals who also know to use the cool hours for movement. Because the camels and goats of the desert have their own thermal management strategies and they use them. The fire at night in the Saharan camp is not primarily about warmth, though in winter it is absolutely about warmth. In summer it is about light and community and the preparation of food and tea. The Tuareg tea ceremony, 3 glasses of intensely sweet mint tea prepared over a small fire, progressively diluted and sweetened in a specific sequence, is not merely a pleasant custom. It is a ritual of hospitality and community that serves multiple practical functions simultaneously. It provides hot liquid, and hot liquid in a hot environment is not counterintuitive, but is actually effective because it stimulates sweating, which provides cooling. It provides sugar, which is an immediate energy source in a diet that can be calorically marginal in difficult seasons. And it provides the social structure of a shared ritual in an environment where social cohesion is a survival requirement, because nobody survives the Sahara alone. Survival in the Sahara is always collective. Let us talk about water in the specific terms of the desert, where it is, how you find it, how you move across a landscape that contains it only in specific places that require specific knowledge to locate. An oasis in the popular imagination is a pond of blue water surrounded by palm trees and green grass in a movie set arrangement. A real oasis is something considerably more complex and considerably more fragile. An oasis exists where an aquifer, an underground body of water, comes close enough to the surface that it can be accessed, either through a natural spring or through the ancient technology of the well or through the even more ancient and remarkable technology of the Fagara, the Saharan equivalent of the Iranian Qanat, an underground gallery that collects water from a distant source and channels it by gravity to a point of use. The Fagaras of the Twat and Garara regions of southern Algeria, which water some of the most improbably located communities in the world, are engineering achievements of staggering ambition. They are underground channels, sometimes extending for many kilometers, dug by hand, maintained by hand, roofed with stone slabs to prevent evaporation losses, sloped with extraordinary precision to achieve the exact gradient required for the water to flow by gravity but not to flow so fast that it erodes the channel. They were built by communities over generations. Each community had its own Fagara network, and the shares of water from each Fagara were allocated through a system of customary law that assigned water rights in proportion to the labor and investment contributed to building and maintaining the system. Water rights in the Saharan oasis system were property, as real and as valuable as land rights, more valuable in many respects, because in the Sahara water is land. Water is the thing that makes land mean something. The palm grove, the palm oasis, is a technology as much as it is a landscape. The date palm, Phoenix dactylifera, has a specific combination of properties that make it uniquely suited to the desert oasis environment. Its root system goes very deep, reaching down to the aquifer or to the capillary moisture zone above it. Its trunk and crown can tolerate extraordinary heat and direct sun that would kill almost any other tree. Its dates are calorically dense, storable in dried form for extended periods, and nutritionally complete enough to sustain human life as a significant fraction of the diet in conditions where other foods are scarce. The shade of the date palm grove creates a microclimate beneath its canopy that can be 10 or more degrees cooler than the surrounding open desert. making it possible to grow vegetables and other crops underneath the palms that would be killed by direct exposure. The traditional Saharan oasis agriculture is a three-tier system: dates at the top, fruit trees and grain crops in the middle, shade, vegetables and herbs at ground level. Maximum productivity from the minimum available water, organized through the structure of the trees themselves. The knowledge of where water is in the desert is not mystical, and it is not random. It is systematic, it is observational. It is based on the reading of a landscape that, to an untrained eye, looks entirely featureless and uniform, but to someone who has spent a lifetime in that landscape is full of signs as clear and as legible as street signs in a city. The presence of certain plants in the landscape indicates water at certain depths. Not jungle plants, not obvious greenery, but specific desert-adapted species that only appear where subsurface moisture exists at a depth accessible to their root systems. The arrangement of dunes, the way wind-deposited sand accumulates on the leeward side of obstacles, tells you about prevailing winds, which tells you about the seasonal pattern of moisture movement across the landscape. Certain geological formations, certain rock types, certain kinds of gravel plains are associated with particular aquifer types. The behavior of animals in the early morning, which direction the birds fly, which way the gazelles move, can indicate the location of water sources that a person on foot without this knowledge would never find. This knowledge is not written in any book. It never needed to be, because it was always transmitted directly, person to person, in the context in which it was applicable. A child growing up in a Tuareg family learns to read the desert the way a child growing up in a city learns to read traffic, not through formal instruction but through continuous immersion in an environment that requires constant reading. By adolescence, a person raised in this tradition has accumulated a geographical database of their territory, the known water sources and their seasonal reliability, the routes between them and their lengths and the shade and shelter available along them, the areas of seasonal grazing and when the grazing would be available, the locations of dangerous terrain, soft sand that could swallow a loaded camel, salt flats with thin crusts over deep mud. Areas where flash floods could come without warning from storms 40 kilometers away. That constitutes a complete and reliable navigation system for their specific piece of the Sahara. The relationship between the nomadic pastoralists and the oasis communities is one of the great ecological partnerships of the Sahara, and it is one that is easy to misread from outside. The nomads and the oasis farmers were not in competition, or not primarily in competition, though conflict between them has certainly existed at various points in history. They were in a relationship of economic complementarity that made both groups more robust than either could have been alone. The nomads needed the dates and grain and vegetables of the oasis. The oasis farmers needed the animal products, the meat and milk and leather and wool that the nomads produced. The nomads served as the transportation network of the Sahara, carrying goods between oases and between the desert and the outside world. The oasis community served as the anchors, the fixed points of certainty in a landscape that required movement to exploit, but also required stability to sustain. This relationship expressed itself in elaborate systems of customary exchange and obligation. The right of a nomadic group to water their animals at a particular oasis well, the obligation of an oasis community to provide hospitality to travelers, the protocols for trading, the systems for resolving disputes between groups who competed for the same resources in difficult years. All of this constituted a legal and social architecture as sophisticated as any formal legal code, and considerably better adapted to the specific conditions of Saharan life than any formal legal code imposed from outside has ever managed to be. Let me take you to the specific geography of heat, because the Sahara is not uniform in its extremes. Some places are hotter than others, and the reasons why are interesting. The Azazia in Libya recorded what was long believed to be the highest air temperature ever recorded on Earth, 57.8 degrees Celsius in 1922, a record that was later disqualified by meteorological authorities who found problems with the measurement. But the point of that number is not its precision. The point is its magnitude. The region around Tripolitania and Fezzan in Libya, the Jado Plateau in northeastern Niger, the Tains-roofed basin of southern Algeria, sometimes called the Land of Terror even by the Tuareg who know the Sahara as well as any people on Earth. These are places where the combination of geographic factors produces heat that approaches the absolute physiological limits of what the human body can survive. The Tains-roofed, that name deserves a moment's attention. It is approximately 400,000 square kilometers of absolutely flat gravel plain, almost entirely without water, almost entirely without distinctive landmarks that would allow navigation without instruments, almost entirely without life visible to the naked eye. It is a region that traditional Saharan traders crossed in organized caravans with meticulous preparation, or they did not cross at all. There are accounts from the trans-Saharan caravan era, the centuries when caravans of thousands of camels crossed this terrain carrying gold and salt and slaves, of the preparations required before entering the Tainsruft, the calculation of the water that would be needed for the people and the animals, the selection of camels who were known to be able to go longer between drinks, the specific order of march designed to prevent the strongest animals from setting a pace the weakest could not maintain. The caches of water that earlier caravans had left at specific points in the plain and that later caravans would rely on. A form of mutual aid extended across time, between groups who might never meet but whose survival was linked through this shared infrastructure of buried water. When those caches were missing, when an earlier group had failed to leave what was expected or a sandstorm had buried the markers, people died. Not sometimes, regularly. The caravan routes of the Sahara are marked literally by bones, by the skeletons of camels and the graves of people who did not make it. Medieval Arab geographers who described the trans-Saharan routes were matter-of-fact about this. Certain passages in their accounts read like actuarial tables. A caravan of this size making this journey can expect to lose this fraction of its animals and occasionally its people. The mathematics of desert crossing was known, accepted, and managed as a business risk by the merchants who financed these expeditions. The sand dunes, the erg, the Arabic word for a sea of sand dunes, covers only about a quarter of the Sahara's total area. The rest is rock and gravel plain and salt flat and mountain. But the erg is what most people imagine when they imagine the Sahara, and there are good reasons to spend time understanding it because it is genuinely extraordinary and because it functions as an environment in ways that are not obvious. The Grand Erg Occidental and Grand Erg Oriental of Algeria, the Erg Agaidi and Erg Chech of Mauritania and Algeria, the Erg of Fezzan in Libya, the Great Sand Sea of Egypt and Libya, these are among the largest continuous sand masses on Earth, and the dunes within them are not the gentle ripples of a sand beach. They are massive geological structures. Star dunes that form where winds blow from multiple directions can reach heights of 300 meters. Longitudinal dunes that run for hundreds of kilometers in the direction of the prevailing wind. Barkhan dunes, the crescent-shaped mobile dunes that migrate across the desert floor at rates that can be measured from year to year, consuming the edges of oases, burying structures, closing roads, existing in a state of constant slow movement that makes permanent settlement within an active erg, a continuous negotiation with a landscape that does not sit still. The physics of an erg in peak summer heat is worth understanding in some detail because it explains some of the most dangerous conditions a person can encounter in the Sahara. Sand has a very low specific heat capacity compared to rock or water. This means it heats up very quickly when solar energy hits it, and it radiates that heat very efficiently. A sand surface in full summer sun can reach temperatures of 80 degrees Celsius or above. The layer of air immediately above this surface, the first few centimeters, is superheated and creates a refractive condition. The familiar desert mirage, where distant objects appear inverted above the horizon because the light passing through this turbulent hot air layer is bent in ways that the visual cortex interprets as a reflection of the sky on water. Travelers across the erg who do not know this see lakes in the distance that do not exist, water that recedes as you approach it, a particularly cruel trick for a person whose survival depends on finding actual water. The surface of an erg is also genuinely difficult to walk on. Soft sand collapses underfoot with every step, requiring more energy per unit of distance than almost any other terrain type. The caloric cost of walking through soft sand at high temperature is extraordinary, which means water is being consumed at an accelerated rate, which means the time before incapacitation is shorter, which means decisions about where to walk and when matter enormously. But the erg also has properties that make it